Good afternoon.
Hello.
What a wonderful crowd here. This is a mighty talented bunch of people. I know some of you, I've known some of you for quite some time, but I can tell you by looking at you, you're talented. Every single one of you. I'm honored to make a few remarks about Avram Friedman, and I guess it kind of reminds me of John Prine and Chris Christopherson. Anybody in here know either one of those two gentlemen? Not personally, just you've seen them and you've heard of them, I hope. How many of you know either one of them personally? Chris Christopherson or John Prine?
Oh, we know.
Well, you don't have to. We'll go on with it. The tale is told, and I believe it's probably true, that Chris Christopherson has pretty much already made it. Somebody tell us one of Chris Christopherson's songs so we don't have to go on without you knowing that. God bless. How about me and Bobby McGee?
Yeah.
That's another Chris Christopherson song. So Christopherson was up at Chicago one time, and this guy named John Prine was in there performing. And he did a few songs, and Chris Christopherson's got a real low voice, and he said, "Hell, somebody break his guitar. He ain't got no business doing all of that." Chris Christopherson, or John Prine, is famous for writing great songs, being a great musician, and at one time was a fantastic low voice singer. And that was Christopherson's take on it, that he didn't have any business having all that talent. Now, Avram, I'm beginning to think somebody's going to have to take something away from you. That's kind of the way I see Avram. I will quickly go over some things that I know about Avram, and then turn it over to him, because that's who we're here to work with today and to enjoy and celebrate. The first time I ever met Avram really was at my house. He came out to do plumbing for me. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for plumbers. I was a boiler operator in the Navy, and I know the thinking and the logic that goes into plumbing. I decided I was going to about quit plumbing, so I wanted Avram to do it. And he did a great job, gave me a fair price, treated me really good. The next thing I knew about him was he was heavily involved in solar energy. That was at a time when it was kind of a new idea in America. He's been around that stuff for years. Now he's right back in it, I might mention. Some of you know that already. Then Avram got involved in the Canary Coalition, which is an environmental outfit that, how many of you all belong to? Fantastic. The rest of you get down on your knees and repent right now. Sign up to join the Canary Coalition. The next phase that I saw Avram involved in was the NAACP, recognizing the link between low-income poverty people and the destruction of environments. And Avram's been clever enough to link those things together and work with people. And then, of course, he's been a politician. He's going to tell you this stuff, but I want to tell you too. He's been involved in politics, not only as a campaigner and that sort of thing, but as a person who has run for office. And now, as Christopherson would say, he's taken up the pen and has published a great little book called The Silver Maple Conspiracy. And in addition to that, he's back involved in the Solarized Western North Carolina. And as a spinoff of the Canary Coalition, he's doing videos and news. And he's done some stuff for me along that line. And he's done great quality work, just like everything else that Avram does. And I wanted to show this to you for a specific reason. It shows you the breadth of talent that Avram has. To be able to do high quality engineering work, to know about it and be able to do it. And then to be able to write and produce the way he does the TV and environmental stuff that he's gotten into now. So I'm excited about listening to Avram Friedman tell us about the Silver Maple Conspiracy. Let's welcome Avram.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I know most of you, and a few new faces to meet. but I'm honored to have you sit in and listen to me talk about myself and this book. Just as a continuation of my activism, before I get into this book, I want to point to this piece of paper that I left on everybody's seat. And this is kind of an exciting new development in Western North Carolina. This is being done in other parts of the country and other parts of the state as well. And the Canary Coalition has just joined this program. We have the territory of Jackson County, Haywood County, Macon, and Swain County. And what we're doing here is finding, we're matching people who want solar energy on their homes, businesses, and industries with vetted contractors who we know are honest and do good work. And we're getting about an 18% discount for doing that. And those of you who may be familiar with the technology know that the cost of solar energy has been plummeting in recent years. And it's quite affordable now. Another thing that this program is doing is matching people with financing to make it affordable, so that in essence, on a monthly basis, as you pay off this system, you're still saving money from what you were paying before for your utility bill. So if you have an interest in solar energy, this is a great time to get involved with it. And we're having our first forum where you can actually meet contractors on March 17th. Thomas in the back has been real involved in this program, Thomas Rain Crow, and several other Canary Coalition members. We're meeting for the first time for Jackson County on campus at St. David's Episcopal Church, 7 o'clock, March 17th, which is it Tuesday? Mm-hmm. Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. So much for the advertising. So the Silver Maple conspiracy came about when I broke my leg in 2012. And several people have asked me since you walked in here, well, where did you find time to write a book? Well, that was when I broke my leg. I found the time to do it, and my good friend Kerry Rayburn, who was videoing, took care of me during that period of time and answered all my complaints and demands in doing so. And she was wonderful, and here she is helping me again today.
This is it.
Video recording. So to me, I can tell you the essence behind the Silver Maple conspiracy is really a statement about the change in consciousness that has enveloped the human race and the world since the 1960s, between the 1960s and today. We've gained, in a very subtle way, sometimes in bigger leaps and sometimes in inches, a global consciousness that the human race hasn't had, perhaps has never had before, or hasn't had in a very long time. In a sense, we're regaining a global consciousness that may have been there to a certain extent when primitive human beings roamed the earth. Perhaps because of the Industrial Revolution and all the changes in technology that we've all experienced during our lifetimes and our parents experienced during their lifetimes, we lost a certain amount of that being in touch with the earth around us. But we're beginning to regain that, I think. And the way that's happening is what this book is about. And how it personally affected the main character, who some people say is me, but I entirely deny that. And we're not only talking about an environmental consciousness, although that's certainly a part of it, but just a global political consciousness as well. and so many changes that were brought about in consciousness by the Vietnam War, which was a very different kind of war for the United States of America and for the world. I think it may be the first war that was widely, and this may not be true, but it was a war which was widely considered unjust and unnecessary, and in which the United States lost. There have been other wars that, the Mexican War was protested by a lot of people, the Korean War, but the United States lost the Vietnam War, and some 50,000 Americans died in the Vietnam War. More than 1 million Vietnamese people died in the Vietnam War, and hundreds of thousands of Americans had their lives ruined, even if they survived, because they suffered terrible physical and mental injuries. And this really permeated the consciousness of America back then. And I think the changes that evolved from that continue to influence today's culture and today's consciousness. And this coincided at the same time with the first, space missions in which we saw the world, we saw photographs of the world, and so we were gaining a global consciousness at the same time. At the same time, science was advancing, and we began to understand ecology better and how everything was interrelated to everything else. All of these things were concurrently happening and have continued this process until today. And that's what this book is about. So what I'd like to do is read an insert and an excerpt, excuse me. And this particular one talks about another part of our consciousness that was changed. In my generation, and many of the people in this room have probably experienced it, whether you'll admit it or not, were a change in consciousness due to drugs that were on the market and were experienced by our generation, and that was a big part of our culture in the 60s. So I'm going to read an excerpt that talks a little bit about that, and also first introduces us to a maple tree, which will continue later in the book with different maple trees and a different maple tree. But this was the first introduction of the maple tree to the main character, Alan Goldstein. And I think I've lost my place for just a minute. So, just before this excerpt that I'm going to read, about a year before, Alan had first experienced smoking marijuana. And his girlfriend at the time, this is a year later, asked him if he wanted to do a hallucinogenic drug with him. And he didn't know the difference between marijuana and a hallucinogenic drug. He thought he would just get a little higher and it would last longer. And so this is the excerpt about that experience. About a half hour went by and nothing apparent was happening. There were 3 of them doing this. So the 3 decided to walk down to an entrance of Flushing Meadow Park, 4 blocks west of the house. The heat of that day, that clear day, was coming on strongly. It would reach into the 90s again. Alan began to feel an energy humming from within his body. It soon became difficult to constrain himself, and he woke from his walk into a trot. He broke from his walk into a trot and then into a full-throttled run. Angie and Patrick felt it as well and began to run behind him. As Alan approached and passed through the entrance of the park, the acid began to affect his mind more perceptibly. Images came and went rapidly, and it made him uneasy. It grew more intense with each passing moment. He saw himself as a young child. He saw his mother, father, and sister when they were younger. He saw places he'd been long ago but forgotten. Then, random blocks and streaks of intense colors flashed in and out, morphing into stark black and white objects with sharp edges. There was an acceleration of more harsh images and flashes until he looked up at the sky and saw what looked like a huge widening crack, a black chasm in the middle of the cobalt blue sky, the blistering red-hot sun glaring down with unbearable heat. The crack widened further, revealing a stark four-pronged object that dominated his sight, his own consciousness, and indistinguishable from the sky into which he was peering. Was it a swastika? To his horror, it was. What did it mean? Was he experiencing the residual terror many living souls, including his own parents, still felt from the near miss of domination by Hitler and fascism during World War II? Or even more frighteningly, was he realizing the present, and was his drug-enhanced mind cutting through the facade, the superficial illusions inculcated into his mind in school, through television, radio, newspapers, magazines? Was he for the first time seeing the reality of the here and now? What was illusion and what was reality? The barrier between the two had dissolved. Cascading through his mind were scenes of the National Guard gunning down peaceful demonstrators at Kent State University, the Chicago police force in riot gear, clubbing and tear-gassing the crowds outside the Democratic Convention, Mayor Daley jumping up and down, pointing, shouting, "Sit down, you fucking Jew," to Senator Abraham Ribicoff, who was at the podium decrying the Gestapo tactics of the police outside. General Thu holding a gun to the head of a spindly, crying Vietnamese man, blowing his brains out for the world to see and understand the sickening power he held in his hand. Alan did not know why it was there, but the swastika ruled the earth from behind the sky and burned its image in his mind. It was not a product of deliberate thought, but rather his experience of the moment. All other thoughts and images came and went, but the dark, throbbing symbol remained ever present. Although Angie and Patrick were physically present, Alan was alone now, forced to confront the universe both within and without. Filled with fright and panic, his vision, the trip, his mind were out of control. It wouldn't stop, and it was just beginning. There was no way to turn it around. He had ingested the drug and now had to face whatever happened next. What was the meaning of this dreadful icon? This object that towered from behind the sky and within his mind. He was still running and succumbing to exhaustion when he began to feel sick to his stomach. Was he going to die? Was there poison in the LSD? Obviously, to the numerous others, oblivious to the numerous others strolling by, he desperately looked for protection from the torment of the sun and found it in the shade of a broad maple tree within a large, foot-worn, patchy grass meadow where he collapsed and vomited until his stomach was empty. He tore off his t-shirt and used it to wipe his mouth and face. He looked down at the excretion that had come from within his physical being, now a vile, pinkish, brown, wet mound on the ground. He breathed deeply as if for the first time, like a fetus just released from the womb, free of the umbilical cord. He had cleansed himself of all that was impure. Everything unclean within him was now out of him down there in that repulsive puddle. He looked up at the sky, and the chasm was gone, along with the swastika. The sun was shining and it was hot, but he was protected by the shade of the tree. His fear and panic were replaced by a profound crystal clarity of vision and thought. He studied his hands, his fingernails, the hair on his arms. With primitive realization, he understood their functions. Each part of his body served a purpose. He understood for the first time that his body was that of an animal, or at least that's the word human beings use to describe this state of being. His body was an instrument specifically adapted for survival on this floating rock in the sky we call Earth, to serve as a vessel for carrying his consciousness. He looked closely at his surroundings. There was an old bubble gum wrapper next to him on the ground. He picked it up and saw tiny black particles accumulated on it. Then he looked around and realized he could see these particles in the air around him. Looking up at the sky, he saw jetliners landing and taking off at LaGuardia Airport, trailing long black exhaust fumes. In the further distance, he could see black smoke forming an ongoing plume, emanating from a power plant on an island in the East River. He realized he was breathing in these particles and others that were so small he couldn't see them, and they were accumulating in his lungs just as they were on the bubblegum wrapper. He had to leave this place and go where the air was clean and pure. It was a matter of survival. Then he looked at the trunk of the tree that was providing him with life-giving shade. He saw the tree was a living, sentient being. It was moving with the wind, but it was also breathing. He could perceive the oxygen and vapor floating off its leaves into the air in interaction with the sunlight. He could perceive its body fluctuating with the passage of time in interaction with micro-temperature changes, the wind, and other stimuli. He stood up, walked over to the trunk, rested his head against its bark while placing his arms around its circumference, and closed his eyes to enter communion with the tree, the earth beneath it, and the bits and pieces of life that managed to survive despite the city's vast concrete encasement that smothered all else. You had enough, or should I go on? I had one other excerpt that
So you're saying that you knew someone like Alan that had this experience?
very intimately. Yeah, if anybody feels like asking a question at this point, you are most welcome to. And I will continue as soon as I find a place that I have
Did that happen while he was at Woodstock? Is that where that was going on?
No, this was at Flushing Meadow Park,
Oh.
which is, this was after, have you read the book?
Just a little bit.
Has anybody read the book? Okay. He went to Woodstock first, a year or so earlier, and that is where he first smoked marijuana and had that experience. And again, the context is, the Vietnam War, and he was going to college at the time, and there were so many influences and such pressure on people during the Vietnam War, especially those who were in very strong opposition to the war. The draft was something that was hanging over your head all the time, and for people like Alan, weren't sure why they were in school, except perhaps to avoid the draft, because if you were in school, you got what's called a 2S deferment, which allowed you to stay in school until you graduated, and then you'd be eligible for the draft. And that was the other section I wanted to read to you, actually, if I can find it. So, Alan had just gone to the first Earth Day in 1970, which was in downtown Manhattan, and it was an amazing event, and it was an amazingly positive event, and there were many sectors, many people from all walks of life who attended this Earth Day event. There were public officials, there were senators and congressmen, and there were hippies, and there were local people from both parties, and it was an immensely positive event that occurred in 1970 toward the end of the Vietnam War, but the Vietnam War was still raging on. And many people were feeling despair, including Alan, directionless in life, not sure why they were in school. They were attending anti-war demonstrations on a weekly basis. And the world seemed pretty bleak. You'd see people you knew in high school come home without limbs, without ears. Some people you heard about dying that you knew in the war, And then Earth Day happened, and it was this uplifting event. And Alan, in the book, comes away feeling like suddenly there may be a new purpose to his life. There's another direction. Instead of protesting something, here's something to work for, saving the earth. And it was extremely inspiring. Then, 2 weeks later, on May 4th, after Nixon started bombing Cambodia, the National Guard fired 67 rounds into an anti-war demonstration at Kent State University in Ohio, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. The outrage was universal. Hell broke loose on campuses and on streets everywhere in the nation. Students went on strike, shutting down hundreds of universities. At Hunter College in the Bronx, the morning after news arrived at the Kent State Massacre, a group of activists set up a makeshift stage with a portable sound system at the center of the main lawn. A leader of Students for a Democratic Society led the charge. On strike, shut it down! On strike, shut it down! On strike, shut it down! The chant quickly attracted dozens, then hundreds of students who joined in. Soon, the lawn was packed solid as people came streaming out of the buildings. The unified chant echoed loudly throughout the campus and blared out, bouncing off the tall apartment buildings in the neighborhoods surrounding the university. On strike, shut it down! On strike, shut it down! Alan viewed the sequence of events from the outer edge of the lawn where he had been sitting under a tree, struggling to force himself to prepare for his next class. He felt detached from his studies, but also from what was happening in the center of the lawn, because for him, school had already shut down months ago. He would easily comply with the strike. His Spanish class didn't mean much to him anyway. The school was shut down for several days, and since this was nearly the end of the semester, it was a shambles for the college administration and for students who had final exams and term projects due. For many, it was as if the world had come apart at the seams. It all served to reinforce Alan's alienation and furthered his desire to drop out of school. He never took his final exams and just wandered off. I think that was a pretty common experience. that people went through during that period of time. I think that's all I'm going to read from the book because it's a short book. And if I read too much more, you'll have no reason to read it. Any comments, questions?
Just, the way you began the book, with the part that you read, with Alan underneath the maple tree and having this clarity of something shifting in his life, and then the older Alan having another experience underneath the maple tree. What were you kind of trying to open up and close there?
Well, actually, the excerpt I read about him having that experience on acid in Flushing Meadow Park was not the beginning of the book. That was sort of toward the middle of the book, actually. The beginning of the book, the structure of the book is basically 62-year-old Alan coming out onto his porch in Dillsboro, North Carolina, and looking at that tree and wondering why it was still standing, because he actually wanted to cut that tree down. Another phenomenon, of things that you learn on such a deep level, sometimes during the course of your life, you tend to put them in the back of your mind and forget lessons that you've learned. and forget the consciousness that you've gained from those experiences, either through a process of denial or it's just too much to handle while you're going around in your everyday life and doing the tasks that you have to do. And so I think that Alan in the beginning of the book is looking at that tree and saying, why haven't I cut that down? It's in the way, it's smothering these other trees that I want to grow. There was a dogwood tree, a cherry tree, and a grapevine that were being shaded out by the tree. He needed firewood. He was looking at the tree as firewood. And he was just looking at the tree and saying, why haven't I cut that down? I know I've thought about this for the last 20 or 30 years. And so then the story goes into the rest of this. He reminisces back in his life to all the points at which he was going to cut the tree down, but something interceded. And that's basically the body of the book. And then the end of the book, here he is back at 62 years old and still intent on cutting this tree down, but something is holding him up and something stops him.
So is it a conspiracy by the maple tree?
Again?
The conspiracy, is it the tree having a conspiracy to
The tree
prevent
is part
you?
of the conspiracy. But it's not the whole conspiracy. The tree is
What made you choose the medium of a novel rather than a memoir?
because I wanted to be able to play with the facts a little bit, and maybe the main character is more of an ideal than the reality, and this way nobody can sue me.
I was curious if there was any link at all. I know that before Walmart was built, that there were two beautiful silver maples on that site that got cut down. Does this have anything at all to do with that? Am I just totally
Not consciously, but that is interesting. I mean, Walmart has certainly generated change in Jackson County and Sylva. I mean, there was a significant landmark in the change of character of this community, I think, when Walmart was built. That was a mountain. Walmart was a mountaintop removal project. Love's Field at the time was there, and there were homes on that hillside. And if you look at the cut behind Walmart, you can see how the landscape used to be. It came down gradually from there instead of. That was a big chunk of earthing.
Can you articulate a little bit more on the whole conspiracy? I'm kind of like her, I'm curious, you know.
Well, I'm, you know, I don't want to give too much away, but it was a conspiracy that involved the tree in relationship to the rest of the landscape, to God, if you will, and Alan himself was part of the conspiracy. That and the conspiracy, it was a conspiracy to save the life of the tree. It wasn't a conspiracy against Alan, it was a conspiracy to save the life of the tree.
And Alan too.
Well, in some ways perhaps, but again, we'll have to read this book to see what happens to Alan.
What would Alan say about how we've evolved since that time?
Since
Since the Vietnam War.
Oh, since the Vietnam War. Well, I think Alan would say essentially what I said at the beginning, that the human mind has evolved considerably since that time in terms of gaining global consciousness and a more intimate understanding of ecology in the purest sense of the word, the interrelationship of everything that's alive, including human beings, and how it's an interdependency that if we destroy the rest of the world as human beings, we are destroying ourselves in the process.
Do you think we're anywhere near any kind of tipping point in terms of awareness in regard to that?
In terms of awareness,
Of the interconnectedness of all of life in that way?
I think we are. I think it's a race, you know.
Right.
Can we become conscious and take action
In time.
to preserve the world? Not really preserve the world. The world is going to survive.
Right.
It's whether we're going to do it in time to save humanity and much of life. You know, I'm hopeful that we can. I mean, I feel like I, in some ways, dedicated my life to making that happen. Certainly working against some pretty powerful forces. Winston?
During that time, I was with college students all during that time. And so many of those college students that I knew are still doing good things, but not to the degree that Adam did. And they're overwhelmed. They're good people, but something has prevented them to do what the main character did.
Well, you know, and I think that speaks to the issue I was talking about earlier, how we tend to forget lessons that we've learned in the course of our everyday lives and existence. We have so many things influencing us on a daily basis to just keep doing what we do, making money to survive and go out and buy food and pay the rent or the mortgage. All of these things tend to put our consciousness about the environment and survival in that sense in the background, on the back burner. And it takes effort to remind ourselves that there's this other level of existence that we better worry about.
So what would you hope a reader would take away from your book? Where would you hope it plays?
I don't know. I didn't really write this with a purpose like that in mind. I really just wrote it as more like a catharsis for me. And I had all this time on my hands, you know, to do it, and so I did. But I hope that there'll be some inward thinking that results from this. Maybe people who have had common or similar experiences will relate to it and be reminded of that consciousness.
You mentioned something that I keep forgetting. It's our remembering the things that we've learned along the way. And over the years, from time to time, I've said to myself and to others, why is it our children aren't standing up and protesting some of the things going on? And I keep forgetting there's no draft.
Yeah.
And I think it was
big
the draft that was a big factor then.
But you know what, Ron? I think what maybe a lot of people our age are missing is that a lot of the consciousness that we grew into, you know, during our lives, our children and grandchildren are born with that. They're born into a global consciousness at this point. Seeing a picture of the Earth from space is not new to them. And they've been exposed to an ecological consciousness. Many of, I would say most of this generation have, and that's really the great hope. Where I think the problem is in the lack of activism is rather a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness that has been inculcated into this younger generation. They believe that it doesn't matter what they do, it's not going to matter anyway. They don't have the power to change anything. And I think that it's our task to show people of all ages that they do have power and that what they do does matter, and that it's not hopeless unless you sit by and watch it happen and don't do anything.
I think that's one of the things that we remind ourselves of too, in terms of what you've been talking about, of all the things that take our time and energy as life goes on. There's also that wearing down that can occur, you know, to remind ourselves that what we do does make a difference, and we just have to hang in there and keep doing it, you know, whether or not we see the results ourselves or not. I feel that's another task for those of us who've grown up in this and have done things through the years, and sometimes more than others, you know, of our lives.
Yeah, every once in a while something happens to remind us, you know, like there's a hurricane or an earthquake, or something that affects us on a personal level. But that lasts for about, 20 minutes and then we go on. Maybe not.
I don't know why you say that the younger generation feels more powerless than we do, because they have really, in many senses, more opportunity than we've had. I mean, I look at so many young people, high school age and college, that have traveled. And I didn't have that opportunity when I was in college. And they have more experiences having exchanges with people in other countries. There's, in many ways, by letter or by internet and so forth. So you'd think that they would have more power and facility to see how to make changes in the world and education than we did.
It's all messaging. They do have more power. The internet is an incredibly powerful tool that we didn't have. What took us months to get a message across in the 1960s can be done instantly now. You know, anybody, any organization can instantly, if they know how to do it, reach potentially millions of people with a message, you know. But it's a question of organization, working together with others, because if you got a million people giving out a million different messages, then no one message is powerful enough to penetrate and do anything, you know. So it's really a question of getting organized, finding people in that generation who are willing to do the organization or work with organizations that already exist. It's not a simple matter, but the power is there. I agree with you 100%. It's just convincing people that it's worth picking up that tool and using that power.
Well, there are lots of NGOs that are, small projects, but they're sustainability projects, and this is going on.
They are.
So what, I think it's really quite positive to some respects.
No, I agree, and I think we just have to feed that. We have to nurture those good things that are happening and get more people involved.
Two things that I observed in relation to what you're talking about. I believe that technology actually drives us apart in modern America. It's a concept of mine. Each of us came in a car, most of us came individually in cars, I'll bet you. We have our cell phones, we have our television, we have our computers, and they tend to drive us apart, whereas your generation and my generation tended to get together over things. As a coach, I can tell you that the most difficult task for a team today is to get them to quit being individuals. They focus on themselves. And walk up to any coach and ask him or her, and they will tell you that's the biggest challenge you have. So that's my observation of it as a coach and as someone who's looking at technology today. So we got to get around those barriers. We got to get people back to where they can work together. Avram said it's organizing with some specific goals in order to get things done. Wait till it starts happening. The computer is going to really accelerate the organizational part of it. I think the Obama campaign, the last 8 years has shown that. They used that to get one thing done, and that is to get Barack Obama elected. And when we start getting tasks that other people can tap into, it'll go fast. Things will happen. And an observation I have on the book, I don't want to steal Avram's thunder. You need to buy the book and read it. It's a fantastic book. The fact that Avram does not get, or Alan does not get to destroy the tree is a stark reminder. It's all going to outlast us. We can destroy part of it and all of us maybe, but we will not destroy all of the globe that we're on. It will last. So that's a good reminder of that to get down to the end of the book.
That's actually would be a great debate about technology either driving us apart or bringing us together, because I used to organize gaming events, bringing young people together, and I know that there are software games that encourage cooperative behaviors, to bring the civilization together, or those types of things. And some of these games have management type models of cooperation. So I just think it would be a great debate, to bring young people in and to talk about that.
Let's do that.
Let the debate begin.
I don't know, Don and I work with a group that's mostly statewide, or at least the left half of the state maybe. And we meet on the phone. Getting together in person is a great struggle because nobody wants to drive all the way over there or all the way over there. And I would say that most of them are about a third of our age, a little more than that maybe. So it's heartening to have so many people so dedicated to the environmental issues in the state, so young.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to say that there are not some who are involved. There certainly are. We need it to happen on a larger level. Maybe we need a draft to bring people together and understand how it affects them on a personal level.
Well, I would just like to offer a thought. I think that anymore, we're still at the point where we make decisions as much on our pocketbook than anything else. And I think what the Solarized WNC can do is help merge those two. the goodwill and the good efforts along with managing our pocketbooks as well. And so that's one of the ways I think that there's hope.
It's a great program. Tom?
Just to continue our little debate.
Yeah.
In my mind, there's a big difference between virtual interaction and face-to-face interaction. And that's really what the debate, I think, the foundation of this debate is about. And it's easy for people to communicate over long distances about issues and actions and things, but to actually get them together and interacting face-to-face and together as groups is what needs to happen. The virtual communication doesn't create anything, any result necessarily, but it's when people get together and actually come together for a purpose that things actually get done. And I think that whole thing about the individual, we're all focusing on being individuals as opposed to a community of human beings is really the thrust of what I'm trying to say.
Well, now that's a good question, and you would be a good person to answer this question. So organizations like change.org and the online petitions,
Yeah.
where an individual, has been wronged, and suddenly they get worldwide attention,
Yeah.
and petitions are sent to the highest officials, and change happens. So what about that? I mean,
I
to
think it's
me,
a great
that kind of
thing.
seems like, there is a beginning there, an opening, where we really could, where change does happen.
No, I'm not saying nothing ever happens, but I'm just saying in terms of movements and that have a human component, a human group component that we need to be somewhere at a certain time to raise our voices or to come to a Solar Oils Western North Carolina forum event to learn more about solar energy. It's easy to look at stuff online, but to really talk to the people who are installing the panels and all that, and really get informed and get plugged in in a real way, I think that's what's missing. I'm not saying that technology is bad.
Well, yeah.
I'm just saying that it's the first step to the next step, which is where things really happen.
I don't think it's an either-or question. It's not really a debate. I think both things have to happen. On the local level, that's where we need to meet, like we're meeting in this room, and like we're going to meet at Western on the Solar Eyes program. I think that needs to happen. But we also need to network with people in other places and other parts of the world even, and that needs to happen too, because we have global problems, and so we have to approach this from a global perspective. And it means networking worldwide, but it also means people acting locally on the local level to change things here, and from there it can grow out, and if people are doing that in different places all over the world, then that's progress too. I think it's all part of a greater ecology of human thought and interaction. It's complex. It's not just one or the other. I think we have to.
I think you're so right. I agree with what everybody's saying, and I think that with young people, with my 26-year-old nephew, who's really with it in a lot of ways in terms of, all the technology, and he's also a very caring person. If we're going to reach those kids, we have to use the internet and social media to get them together, right, and to get them riled up, and we have to use their way of communicating as a part of what we do to make it happen. And I also agree, we have to get ourselves together in the same room. And I really think we have to do all of that. I think, like you said, I think it's really both and.
Wasn't the Occupy movement a good example of technology bringing people together
Yeah.
in the street?
Yes.
That's our example of the 60s protests.
And the protests
The
about
Occupy movement is a very profound movement, and it's not dead by any means. It's just morphed into other things. I mean, people are getting involved in different issues, and you don't may not be calling it Occupy anymore, but those people have been active ever since Zuccotti Park.
And isn't that an example of the technology at the high speed we're talking about that we have today, bringing people into the same room?
I think it's an example of the technology, but it's also an example of things happening on the local level again. That is a very complex movement.
That was local.
That was everything from word of mouth to cell phones to the internet and Facebook to just, I think that was just a product of our times. And that moment in history when people had enough, it became apparent enough that there was 1% up there that were squandering all of our resources and everybody else was getting poorer and poorer, and there was a flashpoint that galvanized movements all over the world, I think, and it was augmented and by technology, yes, but I think it would have happened on one level or another whether the technology was there or not. I think we just reached a flashpoint.
I hope that we would reach another flashpoint with the move to amend. Because I don't think we can get anything really done until we have our government back.
Part of the same movement. You know, a lot of the Occupy groups around the country are now with Move to Amend, which for those of you who may not be familiar with that, is the idea of passing a constitutional amendment, a U.S. constitutional amendment that says corporations are not people, money is not speech, overturning the Citizens United decision, getting corporate and union money and artificial entities out of our electoral process and giving it back to the people, real people.
That's what I think we need to get the young people involved in.
Yes.
They need to understand, because if they understand, I think they feel a little powerless because they see that the people that are being elected into office are not doing anything. You know, they're not passing any laws that would help the environment at this point, the opposite. So they need to know that they need to have something to get behind to make that change.
No, I agree with you 100%. And that's one of the Canary Coalition's priorities now, is we're very involved with the Move to Amend movement. And it affects the environment, obviously, as well as every other social and environmental, economic issue, education, labor unions, women's rights, criminal justice, everything is related to the control of our state and federal government by corporate interests, and it's been taken away from the people. Well, I'll take this silence as a signal that it's time to end. Thank you so much for this stimulating discussion, and glad to sign it. Like it. Oh, you want me to sign it? Yes, sir.